In addition, the newly proposed legislation will require parental notification and a parental opt-in requirement for each instance a teacher intends to address issues or subject matter involving gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality.
So, which is great because then we have British Columbia, we have Alberta, we have Saskatchewan. So it's it's a trickling effect. People are grasping on, and to be honest, Sheila, people are just sick of it. I think common sense is finally taking over now. So let's see all of Canada be part of this.
Banned powerlifter April Hutchinson is weighing in on the Alberta Premier's crackdown on men playing women's sports. On October 1st, Premier Danielle Smith announced that her government will be introducing legislation in the fall sitting aimed at regulating gender transitioning for minors, the use of pronouns in schools, and the problem of trans-identified males playing in women's sports. Now, in a video posted to social media, Premier Smith emphasized that her government has conducted extensive consultations with parents, educators, healthcare professionals, sports organizations, and even members of the transgender community on these apparently contentious issues. This move signals that Alberta is ready to tackle the growing debate over gender ideology and its impact on children and athletes head on.
Firstly, licensed Alberta doctors will be prohibited from performing gender assignment surgeries on youth under the age of 18 in Alberta. Puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment for minors under the age of 16 will also be prohibited unless a minor has already commenced their treatment at this time. For 16 and 17-year-olds wishing to proceed with puberty blockers or other hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment, they may do so only if they have parental, psychologist, and doctor approval.
Now, parents are grateful to have their rights defended. Female athletes, of course, are grateful to have fairness in sport protected. But there's one more aspect that my guest today is very happy about: the protection of safety. April Hutchinson is not just the now world-famous Team Canada powerlifter who was given a 2-year suspension from her sport for speaking out against a biological man and Andrus competing against and defeating women. But April's also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and a recovering alcoholic who has used her sport to stay clean, sober, and healthy. So, April, we know that you're an advocate for fairness in sport, but there's another side to including men into women's spaces and particularly women's sport that I don't think is talked about, but you do. At your recent Rebel News live speech, you talked about this extensively. The inclusion of men into women's spaces and women's sports is fundamentally damaging to women's mental health, particularly when they're recovering from trauma or addiction. And that really was your story, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly, Sheila. That is my story that I've shared many times. I mean, especially at the Rebel News conference. And I mean, I think it's been really brushed under the rug, and no one, especially, people in politics or even the mainstream media, especially the mainstream media, do not want to talk about this subject. And that is allowing men into women's spaces, whether it's bathrooms or locker rooms and sports, because, I'm a sexual abuse survivor. And I can remember the first time that I entered one of these, I guess, universal bathrooms, or it was even a female bathroom, and there was a man standing there with me, and the hair on my back just stood up. I had post-traumatic stress. I just froze, and I was so scared, definitely scared that, everything just kind of came flooding back to me. And, here I am, a grown woman. Can you imagine that happening to, a young girl? I was talking about the stats the other day on another interview where I think it was 30% or more girls have been sexually assaulted or abused at some point, somehow, over the age of 15, sometime in their lifetime. So, we need these safe spaces. And I mean, you're a woman. We go to these bathrooms. Sometimes, if you're at a restaurant or a bar, sometimes women go in groups to escape men just to get away from them. For the government or these institutions and federations to basically put our feelings aside, our mental health and our trauma aside, to appease these men's mental health is really quite appalling and shocking, and it's very, very dangerous.
Yeah, it seems like we're sacrificing the health and welfare of 50% of the population to appease a statistical rounding error of the population. And it is deeply damaging. And you really come at this from both sides. So, fairness in sport, which we all know you as an advocate for. But for you, sport was your vehicle to deal with the addiction that you suffered that was caused by childhood trauma. And then all of a sudden, you've got a man in the place where you're healing from all this trauma and you're being called a TERF because of it.
Yeah, so I mean, it was almost like a triple whammy for me because, when I found out about my suspension, again, I just feel like I was, I guess, re-victimized all over again. And, it's kind of like when my exhibit was taken down from the museum, right? I feel like they just didn't care at all about my sobriety, my sexual abuse. My Canadian Powerlifting Federation knows full well my story, that I'm a recovering alcoholic. Not once thought about my feelings or my mental health. So when I got the suspension, I was just so full of fear. Again, I didn't cry. I was just like, wow. Like, the first thing I thought about was my sobriety, because as you know, Sheila, sobriety, I mean, powerlifting saved my life. It's my outlet. It's many girls and women's outlet to overcome trauma and addiction. It's people's, if they come from a bad home, it's sometimes their safe space. It's their sense of belonging and their sense of community. And I guess, when they sent me that suspension, I just felt like, they wronged me. They made me feel like I was a bad person, all that shame that I had to deal with, having to go through all, the sexual abuse and the addiction, I just felt like they were just kind of reinventing that all over again. And made me feel like a very shameful, type of person. And I mean, it was a lot to deal with. And that's why I'm making this my number one thing, just to be an advocate, because I'm not standing up, or I'm not putting up with it. And thank God we have, legislation like Danielle Smith's coming out very soon.
That's right. It's her flagship piece of legislation for the fall sitting of the legislature. And just in a nutshell, it strives to protect fairness in sport, children from medical transition, and safe spaces for women and girls. And yet there's extreme pushback from the radical left, who think that, as I said, 50% of the population should be thrown on the bonfire of social justice for a statistical rounding error of people. And I think it's by the grace of God and your moral character that you didn't slip back into addiction when you were faced with the scrutiny of the world and having the sport that you used as a vehicle for your healing taken away from you. But I worry about a lot of women who may fall back into addiction because they are now suddenly in the middle of this battle of social justice that they never asked for.
No, I was talking to an athlete yesterday because I'm trying to rally all the athletes in Canada who have youth sports to help them with their mental health or even addiction issues. And I talked to a young lady yesterday out in Vancouver, and she said that basically sports saved her life, and she basically keeps her off the streets. She plays basketball to keep her out of the drug houses in Vancouver. And so, I mean, everyone has their own reason. This other athlete basically was molested when she was a kid. She uses jiu-jitsu as a way to have a sense of belonging and community. Otherwise, she comes from a bad home, a scary place, right? So again, we all have our reasoning, right? And to put a man's feelings above a woman's is just wrong. And at the end of the day, the legislation is very fair. And I've said this many times on many interviews that Danielle Smith is basically just creating a female only so that we have our female only space and sports, but also that there's a male only. So if you're assigned male at birth, you go into the male category, and then there's a co-ed. So that way there's actually two options. So say, for example, Anne, who's actually from Alberta, the powerlifter in the Canadian Powerlifting Union, who kind of caused all this ruckus within the union, he will not be able to compete in the female category. He will have to compete in the male only or the co-ed. And so now he actually has two options. So any woman out there that actually wants to support transgender athletes, which there's a lot of them out there, as we know, they can actually go into the co-ed and support and compete with trans-identifying athletes.
I'm going to ask you, April, and I know we saw this in swimming. How many of these female advocates of men playing women's sports are actually going to join?
Well, so far, a big fat zero. So, like, we have actually introduced separate categories. I know Strongman did this in Canada, out in British Columbia, but the options are there. So, and I mean, they don't enter, I mean, as far as I know right now, because, they wouldn't be able to dominate. They can't take prize money. They can't take gold medals. It's misogyny. It's sometimes, most of the time, very much a fetish. So right now, I mean, I can't think of any sports that have actually created a separate category. I mean, I know besides the swimming, but because they're not interested, right? So, I mean, I think the co-ed is a very, very good option. So hopefully if they truly love the sport and they are truly playing it because they just need it in their life and it helps them with their mental health, then they should be happy with a co-ed category.
A completely empty co-ed category if I had to put money on it. April, a lot of people want to know how they can support female athletes. Maybe they're not an athlete themselves. Maybe they don't care about sports, but they care about fairness. They care about women feeling safe in the places that are their own. How do people get involved? How do they support your advocacy?
Well, yeah, first of all, if you're a female athlete out there and you're on a team and you're discovering that there's males coming into your sport, please contact me because I would love to help you. I'm always, just because I'm not powerlifting anymore doesn't mean I'm still an advocate. So I'm here to help any Canadian athletes. You can also go to my website, www.aprilhutchinson.com. There you can actually send me a message, but you can also buy merchandise, because you know what, the best thing that I found is actually I'm not wearing it today, but I have new merchandise that says Save Women's Sports and Spaces. I actually have new hoodies that say, Real XY Protect Real XX. I have toques with X chromosomes on it. Like, just keep female sports female. Be a walking billboard. Because that means, if you don't want to use your voice, you could just wear it. Because I've had nothing but positive reactions when I do wear it. I went out to Victoria, out in British Columbia, which is one of the wokest, I'd say, cities in Canada. Mm-hmm. I had nothing but old men and packfuls of high school kids give me high fives and say, I love your sweatshirt. So, I mean, I get nothing but positive results. But, I mean, I would say write the federations, challenge policies, because this is where things happen. If you just sit around and actually say nothing or try to challenge it, nothing will be done. And I actually had the policy changed in my federation. I've actually had a few policies changed in different areas because I spoke up, whether it's a DEI policy in the workplace or in sports. But really, you need to use your voice, and that goes for men as well. So,
and what's next for you? Because everybody wants to know what's next for April Hutchinson.
Well, I seem to be really busy. I seem to be going to the West Coast a lot. Alberta, I think, is my second home right now. So tonight I'm actually flying out to Nanaimo. I'm going to be helping my friend and candidate Glenda Mahoney out there in her riding for the BC election. So, as we know, this Saturday is election day in British Columbia. Go Conservatives. So, I'll just be out there helping John Rustad. So, and after that, I might be flying out to possibly Alberta. I am in the works of talking to some council members in Regina, Saskatchewan, to help them with some policies of keeping men out of women's sports and also bathrooms. So, which is great because then we have British Columbia, we have Alberta, we have Saskatchewan. So it's it's a trickling effect. People are grasping on, and to be honest, Sheila, people are just sick of it. I think common sense is finally taking over now. So let's see all of Canada be part of this.
My friend David Menzies is really the journalist of note covering this issue of men insisting on playing against women in women's sports. If you have a tip or if you want to support his very important journalism, visit transmadness.com.